Why do we watch movies and read books about fictional worlds when there's so much we don't even understand about our real world? I don't know the answer to this question. In fact, I don't even know if I want to know the answer to this question. All I know is that I and a lot of other people are drawn to these worlds. And like a curious architectural mind who wonders how a building was built and how it stays standing, lately I've been wondering how a fictional world is built. How does a writer do it all? I mean, the magic systems, the languages, the convincing geography, the quirky cities, and that's not even to mention the socio-political elements.
And on top of that, how does all this get communicated to the audience?
So today I have 3 simple questions. What is world building? How is it done? And how is it shown to the audience? One thing at a time. What is world building? To understand that, we need to understand how traditional narratives work.
Let's start by taking narrative fiction, I'm talking novels, plays, and films, and breaking it into its elements. If you're Aristotle and you're analyzing ancient Greek dramaturgy, you get plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song.
Now, I've seen a lot of these element graphs, and there's a lot of different approaches, but for this video, for our demonstrative purposes, we're gonna keep it simple, with plot, character, dialogue, aesthetic, and setting.
Over the past 2,000 plus years, writers and critics have argued which of the elements is most important. If you're Aristotle, you're plot all the way. If you live in the 21st century, there's a good chance you're batting for character. Shakespearean actors, dialogue. Wes Anderson fans, aesthetics.
But what about setting? In a traditional dramatic narrative, the setting is important to establishing the world of the plot and its characters.
In Pride and Prejudice, Victorian England sets the scene for our characters. In Macbeth, 11th century Scotland provides the backdrop for the drama.
Notice how I said sets the scene and provides a backdrop. In most frameworks of narrative, setting is considered to have a supportive role, merely a canvas for the plot and its characters. But in a narrative like Lord of the Rings with a super fleshed out world of Middle-earth, the setting is so different from our world and so essential to the piece of media itself that it transcends setting and becomes world building.
J.R.R. Tolkien pioneered our modern understanding of world building not only by writing the incredibly influential trilogy, but through an essay where he described the making of Middle-earth and other fictional places as creating a secondary world.
So, to answer our first question, world building is the art of designing a fictional secondary world. This is world building. Okay, that's great, but that doesn't answer our third question, or even our second one. How is it done?
How does an author create a secondary world so convincing that we believe it's a real place and sympathize with its characters and nations? How do you build a world?
If you can't already tell, the second question is a lot harder to answer. The reason I feel so determined to answer these questions is because the last couple years I've been writing a fantasy series, and well, last year when I was writing the first draft, I realized that I loved the characters, but there was something wrong with the world. It didn't feel empty per se, but it wasn't nearly expansive enough to encompass an entire series. And it wasn't different enough from our own world to feel truly secondary. I was writing it like a 2-hour drama instead of like a fantasy series. And you might say all writing is writing, and you'd be right, but you'd also be wrong. Think of it like this.
If you're trying to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but you've only done portraits your entire life, you're gonna have to drastically change your approach.
So in my case, the portraits are my past screenplays, and the Sistine Chapel is my fantasy series. And if I'm gonna make this series a reality, I'm gonna need to change my game plan drastically. I'm gonna need to learn how to world build.
From the world builder, can he write it? From the world builder, yes he can!
But he's currently really overwhelmed about the prospect of writing up an entire fictional universe. Hi, I'm Thom the World Builder, and I'm going to be teaching you how authors world build while I learn myself. When asking how to build a world, you first got to consider what type of author you are and what kind of world building you're trying to do. And there's 2 general approaches to this. There's inside out and outside in.
Let's visualize. Pretend that you've got your main character on the inside, their immediate surroundings as they travel through the plot in the middle, and then the wider world they live in on the outside. Inside-out world builders start with the character and their immediate surroundings as they travel through the plot of the story, and then figure out what they need to build in order to create a convincing world around them. Say you have a fictional tomato named Tomato Thom whose friend was abducted by an evil pistachio and taken to Asparagus City. Well, Tomato Thom is gonna go to Asparagus City, so I, as an author, better put in the work to world build said city. I started inside with the character and went out. Outside-in world builders would start with Asparagus City. Perhaps they wanted to explore the implications of a city where most of the population were asparaguses and other vegetables, and realized, hey, I should probably create an interesting set of characters whose plots will help me explore the city. They start outside with the world and move inward.
Keep in mind that most artists use a combination of these two approaches, zooming out to alter elements of the entire world, and then zooming back in to alter elements of their characters and their plots. It's a bit like an artist stepping away from a canvas to take a look at the whole thing before diving back in again to make those small adjustments.
Now, what makes up a convincing world will also change based on the type of author you are and the type of story you'd like to tell. Do you want a super detailed, extremely logical, fictional world with very fleshed out histories and full languages, like Tolkien's Middle-earth, for example? Then you're gonna do some hard world building. And the opposite applies to soft world building, where the details of the world are foggy. Magic and political systems sometimes go completely unexplained, and a great deal is left to the viewer's imagination.
Now, whether you're doing hard or soft world building, you're gonna need to think of the elements that make up a real world.
If you look at the Wikipedia article of Earth, you get etymology, natural history, physical characteristics, orbit and rotation, Earth-Moon system, hydrosphere, atmosphere, life on Earth, human geography, and cultural and historical viewpoint.
I'm going to start by developing a natural history for my secondary world, but how am I supposed to develop a fictional natural history if I don't even understand our real natural history? Well, that's why I came here today, to a real library on real planet Earth,
Where I'm going to be studying the natural history of our Earth.
Studying 4 billion years of Earth history is going to take him a while, so let's pass things over to Tomato Thom.
Yup, it's me, Tomato Thom, and plot twist, I'm actually going to be one of the main narrators in this video. I was born and raised in Tomatotopolis, a quaint country just north of East Lima Bean City, where tomatoes, zucchini, and pest-eating ducks all live in perfect harmony. Tomatotopolis was established in the year 17,238. And what I was doing there was lore dumping, because while Mr. World Builder explains how world building is done, I'll be explaining how different mediums communicate this world building to the audience. Let's start with lore dumping, or more properly, direct explanation. This is when a narrator directly communicates the details of a world to the audience, as in Lord of the Rings. Let's look at this passage from the prologue to Fellowship of the Rings, which is meant to read as a historical account of Frodo's home of the Shire at a certain period in the history of Middle-earth. The Shire at this time had hardly any government. Families for the most part managed their own affairs. Growing food and eating it occupied most of their time. In other matters, they were, as a rule, generous and not greedy, but contented and moderate, so that estates, farms, workshops, and small trades tended to remain unchanged for generations. You're meant to feel as if you're essentially stumbling upon a historical document of this secondary world. It's direct, it isn't trying to be subtle or even plot-focused at this point. I mean, there's a section here dedicated to pipeweed alone, which is the Hobbit's preferred form of smoking. In A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, a young wizard named Ged is cursed by his own spell and must seek out a way to free himself of its evil. Early on, Le Guin starts communicating the lore of the world. Of the 14 kings of Havnor, the last was Maharian, who made peace both with the dragons and the Kargs, but at great cost. And after the Ring of the Runes was broken, and Erith Akba died with the great dragon, and Maharian the Brave was killed by treachery, it seemed that no good thing happened in the archipelago. There is so much new lore in this book that it can get a bit confusing and alienating, and the same is true of Lord of the Rings. But to say that this kind of direct, lore-dumpy writing is bad is subjective, because there are certainly people who not only tolerate but prefer this kind of writing. It took me 3 starts to get into this book, and then it skyrocketed into my top 10s. I'm 60% through this book, and I still have no idea what time period it's set in. It's an impressive and imaginative work of world building and philosophy, but ultimately ultimately, the truism remains that someone's heaven is another person's hell. This type of direct explanation works for some people and doesn't for others. Let's try something else. Let's try being less direct. Another strategy is incidental world building, where the world, its history, and its customs are shown to the audience as the plot unfolds. Let's take a look at the first chapter of Game of Thrones. The morning had dawned clear and cold, with a crispness that hinted at the end of summer. They set forth at daybreak to see a man beheaded, 20 in all, and Bran rode with them, nervous with excitement. This was the first time he had been deemed old enough to go with his lord father and his brothers to see the king's justice done. It was the 9th year of summer, and the 7th of Bran's life. This paragraph is very focused on the present moment, a group of men traveling to watch a beheading. It's focused on a character, Bran, whose introduction as a character is tied to a suggestion of a phenomena in the world of Game of Thrones, their long seasons. You could just dump this in the first chapter, Tolkien style. In the known world, the length of seasons is completely unpredictable and varies randomly. The current summer has lasted an abnormally long 8 years. Of course, Tolkien would do it with more flair and charm, but unless you're looking for a fictional encyclopedia, which let me stress many people actually are, direct narration isn't always the most exciting way to learn about a secondary world. Let's keep reading. Finally, his lord father gave a command, and 2 of his guardsmen dragged the ragged man to the ironwood stump in the center of the square. They forced his head down onto the hard black wood. Lord Eddard Stark dismounted, and his ward Theon Greyjoy brought forth the sword. Ice, that sword was called. It was as wide across as a man's hand, and taller even than Robb. The blade was Valyrian steel, spell-forged and dark as smoke. Nothing held an edge like Valyrian steel. Here's incidental world building in a nutshell. It's one thing to tell people about a magical sword named Ice, but it's another to tell them about this sword as it's about to be used to perform a beheading. Suddenly, the plot, a beheading, and the lore, a sword named Ice, are aiding each other. The beheading brings a new level of significance to the lore, and the lore adds depth to this moment and grounds it in the details of the secondary world. Neither of these approaches are inherently better than the other. They're simply 2 of the methods to show your lore and your world to your audience, and there's more methods.
But it's been a while since we talked to Thom the World Builder, so let's pass things back to him. How's that natural history research going?
Oh, well, I learned a lot about the Hadean Earth, the Cambrian explosion, and the mass extinctions, and the dinosaurs. But then I started thinking about what kind of plants a brontosaurus would eat, and that kind of got me thinking what kind of food the people in my secondary world would eat. And that got me started thinking about how this food would grow. And well, long story short, I went down a rabbit hole about Indonesian rice farming.
And then I started thinking, geez, there's so much stuff in the world. There's the world, and then there's the ocean and the continents in it, and then there's the people inside of it, and the food they eat, and the politics they follow, and the religion they follow, and then there's the languages they speak, etc., you know, and then I started realizing I need a way to organize it all. And then I discovered the World Building Bible.
I've seen these world building Bibles in the forms of Google Docs, Notion projects, physical binders, whatever way you need to organize your information. Some internet sleuthing gives you categories to research in order to form a complete world.
I decided to make this little to-do list for all the stuff I need to research for my world, and while the Wikipedia list covered all the astronomy stuff, I realized I needed to focus on some of the human-centric stuff that's important to my world, like politics, law, clothing, medicine, the economy, magic systems, food, entertainment. Oh yeah, and in the process of scouring the internet and landing on Reddit, I realized that there's like an entire little micro-industry for world builders.
And he's not just talking about writers who want to world build for their stories, or dungeon masters who want to create a convincing world for their roleplay game, but also about pure world builders. These are people whose singular task is to build a world so storied and detailed that, well, they just do it for the sake of fun, as a hobby. Whoa.
But anyway, I gotta make sure I get through this whole list. I think I left off on the economy? Okay, so I gotta study every single economic system that's ever existed, and then I gotta cross-compare them. And then I need to decide on the...
This video essay is too wordy. Does anyone else think it's too wordy? It is a video essay, so I suppose it's supposed to be essay-like, meaning full of words, but could we lean into the video more? Good thing I'm here to talk about cinematic world building and the unique powers that visual mediums have to world build without saying a single word. Of course, I'm going to use words to explain this to you, but that's besides the point. The saying is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and at 24 frames or pictures per second, your average film adds up to a whole lot of words. Metaphorically speaking, of course. That's a bit of hyperbole, but let's take a look at the opening scene of Ponyo. We open on a view of the ocean's horizon, a full moon, the surface swarmed by ships, but we dip under the surface to find a world of glowing jellyfish, a delightful little ocean floor ecosystem, popping plankton and swimming fish, all gathered in sweeping arcs around a glowing source of yellow light that emits from the end of this boat submarine thing with red fin-looking things. We see a mysterious man with flowing red hair in a blue-white pinstripe suit, dropping this magical, mysterious substance from a golden vat into the ocean. He sees a bioluminescent squid and flashes a light at it in some form of underwater communication. Suddenly, this humanoid little fish thing wearing a red dress sneaks out of a window on the side of the submarine, followed by a bunch of her mini-me's. She lays down on a jellyfish, using another jellyfish as a blanket, and drifts off to sleep and into the open ocean. Now, this opening sequence in terms of the broader plot is pretty simple. Ponyo escapes from her dad's submarine. But in visual mediums, you can use the entire frame to tell multiple stories at a time and create a greater sense of depth. And this sequence is a great example. At this moment, we're focused on Ponyo as she realizes she successfully avoided detection. But on the side of the frame, this little sea pig has detached from the submarine and sort of just free floats downward. This is a simple example, but step things up in complexity in a film like Playtime by Jacques Tati, and the principle of splitting the frame to tell multiple stories is a useful tool if you want to subtly paint the picture of a complex world. Of course, in the case of a fantasy series, you'd be switching out a human lady in Paris for a zucchini in Asparagus City. This is the power of cinematic world building and environmental storytelling. All of this without a single word.
We're here at MSU Map Library, where they've been kind enough to lay out some maps from different fantasy worlds. We got Middle Earth over here, we got the known world from Game of Thrones right here. Visuals are obviously key in cinema, but they're actually really important in fantasy lit as well. And again, that's thanks to that all-encompassing influence of Tolkien, namely his map of Middle Earth for the Lord of the Rings series. This kicked off not just a trend, but a deep-rooted tradition in fantasy literature of showing the reader a map of the fictional world they're about to dive into, so they can start to visualize the world that the characters live in, and so they can start to understand the significance of what it means to go from the Shire to Rivendell, and to wonder, what are the dead marshes, and eventually to wonder what lies beyond the edges of the map. It's become so important in fantasy lit that it's not just welcome anymore, it's really an expectation. A fantasy reader expects to have a fictional map.
And fantasy map making has transcended novels and become a hobby in itself. You'll find maps all over the world building subreddit, some in that classic weathered brown Tolkien style, some in more modern styles, and even some Minecraft renditions. And there's been a flourishing of world builder friendly map making softwares as a part of the aforementioned world building mini industry. What is your fictional world? Is it an archipelago of fractured nations? Is it a relatively connected supercontinent where land is king and the sea is taboo? When you start with a map and with the features of a world, your imagination builds from there. If there's a great river, it will likely become the base for a civilization. Wars will be fought for the control of it.
Understanding the geography of your world is a pretty good first step for understanding your world and its politics. Come to think of it, I should probably start thinking about politics. Let's study some fictional examples.
Star Wars has an intergalactic senate, and then an empire, and then not an empire, and then an empire, and then not. Game of Thrones has a kingdom, which is actually 7 kingdoms, but technically 1, and then it becomes 2.
I should probably study every single political theory that's ever existed in all of history, right? And then, cross-compare them. Oh wait, I didn't even finish cross-comparing or studying economics.
While that guy creeps closer and closer to insanity, we're gonna study video games. Video games are all about options, decisions, and agency. At the core, this means the player has the option to press A or B, or the decision to go up or down or left or right. Taken to its extreme, in some video games, players are deciding the outcome of wars. This decision-making is what makes video games such a compelling medium. And that's why one of the most miserable things in a video game is sitting through lore-dumping dialogue, endlessly pressing A while learning stale information about a world that you don't really care to know much about because dang it, you're just trying to game. This required dialogue, this forced world building can be sloggy, and that's because it's required. But in video games, things don't need to be required, and this is where optional world building comes in. In God of War, you adventure through the 9 realms of Norse mythology as the former Greek god of war Kratos. With the help of your son Atreus, this adventure takes you on a mission to spread the ashes of your dead wife at the highest peak in all of the 9 realms of Norse mythology. Kratos is a Greek god in the unfriendly Scandinavian world, and he doesn't know much about the lore of this strange new land, and in fact, he doesn't want to know. But luckily for the people who care to know anything about the world they're adventuring through, you've got Atreus, the inquisitive and naive son who not only questions everything but documents it as well. Every time you fight a new beast, you have the option to open the screen and learn more about it. And because you have the option to just keep walking and fighting, it makes it feel like you've stumbled across something cool rather than being force-fed a supersized lore burger. You get the sense that this world extends far beyond just what the playable character sees. Now would be a good time to mention that not all lore in video games has to be optional. When it's written and integrated well, required dialogue can really ramp up the tension and make a battle feel even more significant. And because so many modern video games require traversal to get from place to place, world building through dialogue can help fill the silence and sneak in information about the world. You see this in God of War and in titles like The Witcher 3.
War's not exactly going our way. We have a side.
Some of my favorite moments in God of War were canoeing around the Lake of Nine as Kratos and Atreus took their turns telling tales. In God of War, lore is a sort of language and aesthetic, a way of showing the timelessness of the world and the power of its spirits and monsters. This is lore about the fate of gods and worlds, but as fascinating as this stuff is, sometimes you just want to get in a fight, you want to throw the Leviathan axe and experience the rumble as it comes crashing back into your hands, and luckily this game is so consistent about getting you into fights. This is optional world building in the framework of a very guided journey, but in open world games, the game is designed to be explored in an unlimited amount of ways. Open world games are a staple of modern video games, and the freedom their design brings is mirrored by the freedom the player has to ignore elements of the world. An extreme example of this is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. After Link emerges from his slumber, you're essentially free to explore the world however you want. You have a single objective: destroy Ganon. How quick you can beat Ganon depends only on if you're able to beat him. My playthrough of the game took me all over the expansive map of Hyrule as I gained more health, tougher armor, and stronger weapons, and I beat it in about 50 hours, which is standard. But because of the freedom to ignore most of the world, you can beat this game in as little as 24 minutes. So, what did I do in the 49.5 hours I didn't actually need to beat the game? I learned about the dramatic history of Zora's Domain. After talking to a random guy named Goddard and finding an ancient cookbook in the Hyrule Castle, I learned that Monster Cake is said to have been a favorite of the Minister of Hyrule.
And if you thought we were done talking about fictional maps, you're wrong, because I explored the massive world of Hyrule, which is so varied and compelling that people play GeoGuessr with it. You know, that game that people play with Google images of our real planet Earth.
Video game worlds are the modern, interactive version of those fantasy maps. They are living, breathing versions of physical world building. Alright, now we're done talking about fictional maps and video games. And it seems that I've just stopped talking altogether.
Oh, I guess the animation budget ran out for this video. Yikes, which means I should pass things back to Thom the World Builder. How's that politics research going? I was getting pretty far in politics, but then I realized I needed to go back and finish studying economics, so I'm currently studying the economy of ancient Greece. Whoa, cool. So what's your currency called? What? Well, fictional worlds need a fictional currency. You could just say gold or coins, but no, I want something specific to my world, to its language. Oh, language. Oh, so there's a fictional language that your people speak? Not yet. All right, I'm going to invent an entire language, which means I need to study linguistics. Boo-boo means panda. Wait, if I'm making my own fictional world, I should probably make like all fictional creatures, right? I want to create my own creatures, which probably means I should study biology and ecology and creature design. Goodness, I'm exhausted. How does anyone do this? I mean, no wonder it took Tolkien like 16 years to do the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Do you have any advice on how to deal with this like mountain of details?
Actually, I do. What you're experiencing is so common in the world building community that it has its own name: world builders fatigue, or world building disease. It's when authors get so deep into their world building that they forget to finish writing the story that they actually set out to write. And the solution is pretty much the opposite of what you'd expect. It's to embrace mystery.
Mystery, but I'm trying to create a secondary world where everything is precisely plotted and defined.
And that is actually your problem here.
The YouTuber Shaylin Wrights has a great analogy. There's 7 million Wikipedia articles, which means there's at least 7 million things in the world.
Do you have the time on Earth to create 7 billion things?
No.
So you've got to narrow it down to what's important.
And how do I do that?
Well, that one's up to you and what kind of story you're trying to tell. Every author is different, but just remember that even after 7 billion Wikipedia articles, we're still very, very far from fully understanding our own world. It might seem lazy or a cop-out to not write something or to hint at something and never fully explain it to the audience, but just remember that any convincing world is full of mystery.
Thanks. You know, even though I didn't become an expert in every single topic ever in the history of the world, and I won't use a majority of the knowledge that I learned for anything ever, it was still fun learning about life in the Ediacaran period, Indonesian rice farming, and ancient Greek economic theory. You know, just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. I started by trying to gather lore for my fictional world, and I ended up learning a lot of real lore about our real world.
Yeah. Wait, world building seems like a form of escapism, but when you look into it more and realize how much real life research goes into it, it begins to feel more like an ode to the complexity of life. Exploring secondary worlds, whether they're books or movies or video games, can be an incredible new way of looking at the elements that make up our universe. When looked at like this, world building becomes a curious phenomena, evidence of the strange things that can happen when the human imagination mingles with the splendor of our universe.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support more videos like this, you can support us on Patreon at the Magnus Commonplace.
Wow, that's neat.
Oh, Tomato Thumb, we got our budget back.
We did, thanks to our patrons Rick Loftus, Rita McPhail, and Aaron Patel.
Well, thank you. Or, as people say in my fictional world, Tang Doong.
Oh, that one needs some work.
Yeah, languages aren't my strong suit.
Well, we should probably end the video now.
Well, looks like the budget ran out again. Guess the video's over. Yeah, cut.